All right. Hello, everyone. It's good to have you on today. We're going to talk about crop rotation and how that can help us build resilient gardens. I think on the surface, crop rotation seemed like to me, it seemed like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to move my plants. But I think as we take a little bit deeper dive, we'll see what an important tool it is in our planning of our gardens. So, just a little bit of overview of how we're going to go through things today. I just want to give you a bit of an introduction into crop rotation and then some things to consider. And as we're thinking about how crop rotation is going to be implemented, then maybe some other things, not just rotating the crop plants, but maybe thinking about interplanting green manure and cover crops, and then things to consider as we make a crop rotation plan. So that's kind of how we'll go through this today. I wanted to start out with what crop rotation is, and it turns out that crop rotation has been a dependable practice for agricultural systems for a long time. It's even mentioned in Roman, Greek, and Chinese writings very early on. And a researcher at Rutgers said that a well thought out crop rotation is worth 75% of everything else that might be done, including fertilization, tillage, and pest control. So you can see that this can make a really big impact on how your garden grows. So let's do a quick definition. It's simply crop rotation is the practice of changing the crop each year on the same piece of ground. And what we want to see is that the crops not be really closely related botanically, because you don't want to have two successive crops with the same nutrient demands on the soil or to share diseases or insect pests. So in general, a longer rotation before the same crop is going to be better than a shorter rotation. And one thing that we can think about is that crop rotations are both spatial, so we're going to move them around in space, and temporal means that we're going to be moving through time. And if we understand that it's both of them working together, then we're going to be able to visualize the rotation system in the garden space that you have. So we're going to use this to decrease pest and disease populations and increase soil health. And this is just a piece of integrated pest management, which some you'll see as IPM. And if we think about what IPM is, it's using a variety of methods to control pests, including cultural, mechanical, biological, or chemical. And if we are starting our gardens, we know that not one tool is going to take care of every problem. So if we think about these strategies being a toolbox, we can pull out the best tool for the given situation. Crop rotation fits into IPM because it is a cultural method to respond to problematic populations of disease and insect that create unacceptable levels of damage to our desired plants. So what we're looking at here is being preventative instead of reactive by planning ahead and rotating our crops. So one of the ways that we can think about how we would rotate crops is to look at plant families. And what the reason that we think about them as in their botanical families is because often when they're closely related, they're susceptible to the same type of insects and uh, plant diseases, along with similar nutrient requirements. So when the vegetables are cultivated in the same location year after year, then we can get those populations of pests and diseases to start increasing because they have this established, consistent food source. That's exactly what they're looking for to thrive, and we want to disrupt that. We find that vegetables in the same family have a similar amount of nutrients that they extract from the soil. So over time, if we're planting the same thing, then we can see that that specific nutrient can be depleted. And so if we do the same thing year over year, year after year after year in the same location, insect and disease pressure will continue to increase while soil fertility can continue to decline. Now, there are ways that we can amend the soil and we can use pesticides to offer some temporary relief, but ultimately that can be a struggle to keep pace with the growing challenges. So if we can do a preventive measure like crop rotation, then we can pr stop that growing challenge. But to understand how to rotate crops by family, we first need to know which family the vegetable belongs in. And so I made some kind of visual things for you to see. And what we find, some of the very most popular vegetables that we grow are in the Solanaceae family. You might have heard it called the nightshade family. And this is going to be things that people love to grow in their garden, like tomatoes and peppers and potatoes and eggplant, and even things like tomatillos and ground cherries are going to be in this family. And then we have the Apiaceae family, also known as the carrot family. So you'll recognize these as carrots and celery and fennel and parsnips and some of the herbs that we love to use in our cooking, like dill and parsley and cilantro are all in this family. So let's look at some other families, like the brassica or mustard family. This family has a wide variety of vegetables, and we harvest them for all different parts. So broccoli and cauliflower, we harvest the flowers, collards, mustard greens, Napa cabbage, kale cabbage are all harvested for the leaves, Brussels sprouts for its edible buds, kohlrabi for its stem, radish, rutabaga, and turnips for their roots. And so this can be a family that we get a lot of different things out of, but they're all in the same family. And then we have the cucurbit family, which you're thinking about gourds and melons and cucumbers and squash, both winter and summer. And then pumpkins are also in this family. You'll hear sometimes the word legume. This is the Fabaceae family or pea family, and then we're going to see this as beans and peas. And also, there are cover crops that are in this family like clovers or beans or peas that we can add. This thing about this family is these plants have a symbiotic relationship with a bacteria that's able to take nitrogen from the air and turn it into a plant available form of nitrogen. So we call these nitrogen fixers. And this is going to be important in our crop rotation because we are going to see that there's different demands for nitrogen, and we can take their ability to fix nitrogen as an advantage or some of our other crops. Then we have the Chenopodium family that includes spinach, beets, and Swiss chard. And then the alliums or onion family, which is going to be onions, shallots, leeks, chives, and garlic. And then the aster family, which we'll see is lettuce, endive, escarole, and sunflower are all in that family. And then we do have some families that have very few members, maybe only one, that we commonly grow in our vegetable gardens in Illinois, like sweet potatoes are in their own family and okra is in its own family. And then we have the family of grains and grasses, the Poaceae family, where we're going to get all of the different kinds of corn. So sweet corn, ornamental corn, popcorn, but also some things like that we might use as cover crops like rye or oats are also going to be in this family. And the reason that I mentioned the cover crops in there because you're going to have to take that into consideration if you are thinking about a cover crop because you still have to think about what family it's in as you plan the rotation. And I think that's sometimes where we think crop rotation stops is just, I'm just going to rotate those families. But there's some other things that we can really start thinking about if we want to maximize the advantage of this technique. So one other thing we can look at is looking at different growth habits and how we could use them to help us control some things that are problematic. So keep thinking about the rotation of the plant families. Well, that's like the first consideration. We can also start thinking about, can I plant one year a plant with root things that have deep roots that are going to aerate the soil in a certain way. Like a longer root on a tomato, a carrot, or beet is going to break up soil, making channels for air and water and minerals. And some of them can bring minerals up from deeper in the soil profile and closer to the surface so that they're there for the next crop, which you might consider doing a shallow or fibrous root crop that can access these minerals that have been brought up to this closer to the surface. That's going to give you a more uniform distribution of nutrients throughout the soil profile and more available to different plants. You can also think about planting something that is widely spaced next to, and then the next year something that's thickly planted so that you can think about that for weed control. In the widely spaced crops, you can use mechanical measures to take those weeds out and make sure that they're not setting seeds. And then the next year you could do a dense crop that's going to suppress any weeds that are there. And you can work those two in conjunction to help manage some of those weed issues. Another thing to consider is plant crops in which you can prevent weed seed production before a crop that is going to be a poor competitor so that you can kind of take care of those weed issues a little bit ahead of time instead of during the season where you're growing them when they're really causing the competition problems. So if we consider plant families and then we think about the growth sorry, not habitat, habit, and then another thing we can think about is what kind of nutrient requirements does this crop have? So there are some crops that require high levels of nutrients, and then there's some that require lower levels of nutrients, and then there's some that actually are going to put things like nitrogen into the soil, like a legume is a nitrogen fixer. So what you can think about is having a heavy nitrogen feeder, like a tomato, corn, broccoli, or cabbage and planting that right after the next thing that you plant after the legume, because we know the legumes are going to take and add that extra nitrogen into the soil. Then, after you have had that heavy feeder that I just kind of listed, putting in a light feeder because now you've had a year where the heavy feeders have taken a lot of the nitrogen out of the soil, but we do have things that need less nitrogen like carrots and beets and herbs. And so we can plant that in the next year and they're still going to thrive. Then we go to the third year and we think about adding that legume or something like that back into the soil so that the nitrogen can be re-added in. Might not be a crop, it might be a cover crop or a green manure, and we'll talk about that. But so thinking about that rotation of a heavy feeder, a light feeder, and a giver or a nitrogen fixer is a good way to think about this dynamic of how you can manage the nutrients as you go through a crop rotation. And I think as we think about crop rotation, we're just thinking about our vegetables, and now we're thinking about the families and the growth habit and the nutrient requirements. But there's other ways that we can kind of add to that crop rotation. And there are things like intercropping, cover crops, and green manures could kind of put distance between one crop that you're growing to another. So intercropping is just growing two or more crops in close proximity. And so one example of that you might think of is companion planting. And we can implement this in various ways in the crop rotation. So you can add, if you're interplanting, you could add a legume in with a non-legume that could benefit from the extra plant available nitrogen. Like when you grow the beans with the corn and they use the corn as a scaffold and then the beans are going to put the nitrogen in and they can work together. Something to that effect could be possible. It doesn't have to be that, but you get the idea. But we could also use a tall crop to reduce heat or drought stress because they can provide some partial shade or they can protect from drying winds if we have those kind of environmental conditions. Another thing that you can do with intercropping is disrupting the pest populations because a lot of times they're looking for a very specific host. And when you intercrop with something else, it can make it more difficult for the pest to find the specific plant it's looking for because other things are in the way. You can also think about trap crops that are going to attract some maybe pest insects into them and move them away from your vegetable that you're growing. Or you can also plant something that's going to support beneficial insects and pollinators so you can use them as kind of allies in the garden to help you with some issues that you might have. So that's one way that we can use intercropping, or several ways, I guess. Cover crops is another thing that you can do, and especially if you want to protect the soil from erosion, or and you want to make it really healthy, a place for that soil, the biological elements of the soil to have a place to be. Cover crops could be a good option. And what they are is something that you grow between the times when the vegetable plant will be that you harvest will be growing. So either you're going to put them early in the season before you plant a warm season vegetable, like a tomato or a cucumber or a pepper or something like that. Or you're going to plant them, you're going to plant your vegetable and then you're going to harvest that and then you're going to put the cover crop in. And you can decide whether it's going to be something that's winter killed, so you don't have to worry about it in the spring, but you've protected that soil for a longer period in the year. Or is it something that you're going to have to terminate in the spring? And you need to know what your cover crop is so that you can manage it, because cover crops have to be managed. If you're not paying attention and you don't terminate it at the proper time when it's just beginning to flower, then your cover crop becomes the weedy problem that you were trying to prevent instead of the helper that's going to um, in give beneficial effects for your soil health. When you are thinking about cover crops, though, you have to think how they fit in your rotation plan. Because if you're going to use a radish, then you have to think about what family is that in, and is it going to disrupt my rotation? If you're going to use something from the grass or grain family, if you're going to use a legume, so you have to consider all those things as you put that rotation or that cover crop in. Now, if you take your cover crop and you till it into the soil, especially could be beneficial if it was a legume, then that is called a green manure. And that can also be a way of kind of putting space between these, planting the same family or the same growth habit year after year. So disrupting that, these are ways that you could do that without adding another crop into the plant. Another thing to consider is succession planting. So when we think about this, we want to think about a long duration crop followed by a short duration crop, so we can utilize this space in our gardens with different families. So in one season, you might start, have a early crop and then a late crop. So we're going to put more than one family in a season, or you can do that over throughout the seasons. However, you can get that to best work. But we know that different plants thrive in different seasons. So if we're going to we can rotate them to ensure that the plant is getting the conditions that it needs to really thrive and reduce any stress that is on that. So that succession planting with those shorter duration crops can really be a helpful thing if you're trying to manage what crop is going to go where. So the next thing we can start to think about is, okay, if I'm going to use my botanical families and the growth habit and the nutrient requirements, and I'm going to think about cover crops and interplanting and all these succession planting, I need to make a plan. So how are we going to do that? Well, first we need to think about, can we divide our garden into equal size sections? And that can be difficult if you have a small space, but just thinking like, okay, I'm going to make the sections this size, and then I'm going to use that to help me decide where everything is going to go. But if you can keep them in similar sizes, that in the long run, that's going to help you in your planning to make it a bit easier. Then I'm going to count the number of sections and crops that I have and determine, the space for each crop and think about how long of a rotation can I make, keeping in mind that a longer rotation is going to be better than a shorter rotation if I'm trying to keep pest populations down. Then also you need to think about what crops you're going to be growing. Some people have a wide variety of vegetables that they grow, and some people focus on a more select few. And so you got to think about what kind of crop you're growing in not just the botanical family that it's in, but also what kind of crop is it? Is it a root, vine, grain, fruit, legume? Is it for greens? Uh, those are some things to think about. You also want to think about we talked about kind of the duration of the crop. Is it in the ground for a long time or a short time? And then there are also some things to think about. Like some vegetables are going to really benefit from having maybe a green manure or a legume in before them, and some are not going to benefit as much. So I need to take that into consideration and take the ones that really get a great benefit from being planted after a nitrogen fixer and put them right after it, and maybe the ones that not don't have as much benefit from that to move them away from the year that I had the legume in it. So there's a lot of things to consider, but if we start placing all these things in a plan, then we're going to be able to get the best crop rotation that we can. Another thing that we need to think about is how much space these plants take up. So some plants take up a small amount of space, like onions, they don't take up a lot, but some take up a lot, like a pumpkin. And so you're going to be able to fit fewer pumpkins in that space than you are onions. And then maybe you can divide your section into a space for onions and a space for radishes and divide that section up to help give you more wiggle room in your crop rotation. But the kind of another aspect we need to think about is your garden is going to have some specific details in different locations. So maybe you have a wet spot or a dry spot, or something is in a little bit of shade or it's sunny. That's another thing because you don't want to put a plant that needs complete full sun in a shady area, even if it's in your crop rotation. So you're going to have to consider all those kind of really site-specific details to make sure that the plant gets in the right place because stressed plants are just more susceptible to disease and pest pressure. So one strategy you can do is to use index cards to represent the space the plant takes up. So corn, potatoes, winter squash need a lot of space. Onions, beets, kale, and radish can do a small amount of space. So with your index cards, think about, okay, um, my onions are only going to take up this much space of my section, but the corn is going to take up maybe two index cards worth of space. So thinking kind of how you can arrange that, and that's going to give you a spatial idea of how your garden can be set out. And the index cards are going to be those kind of uniform sections that are going to help you to place things where they might be. And the goal is to grow everything that you want on the land that you have with as much time between similar crops as possible. So a big task, but with some careful planning, it's something that you can manage. Now, some experienced gardeners have noticed some things that they have seen are patterns that are really helpful to recognize as you are planning your crop rotation. So I'm just going to list a few. So legumes, onions, lettuces, and squash are generally beneficial to the following crop. So if you have something that needs a bit more nutrients or it needs a little bit more care, it might be good to follow these legumes, onions, lettuces, and squashes up with that crop. However, carrots, beets, and cabbages can sometimes have a more negative effect on the following crop. So, once you've planted those, you might want to consider a soil amendment and thinking about how you can aid the following crop with after the carrots, beets, or cabbages. Onions, they are often noticed that they are not helped to have a legume or a green manure ahead of them. So you would want to put them further back in the rotation after a legume. You'd want to put a heavy feeder after the legume and know that it's not hurting your onions to not be there. So you can put them a little bit farther from the legume and it'll be okay. You also want to grow tomatoes after peas, lettuce, or spinach because the tomatoes take a lot out of the soil and the peas, lettuce, and spinach are going to be more of those light feeders. And so there will be more available to um, the tomatoes. Also, you want to make sure that when you do plant your legume crop, you have a high nitrogen demanding crop right after it so you can take advantage of that nitrogen fixation. And then the second or third year, you're going to grow less nitrogen demanding crops and then add those legumes back into the rotation when you can. So those are just patterns that people have noticed and observed. And what's going to be really important for your garden and your space is that you're making observations about how things perform. And when you see that you are getting an advantage, or when you see that something's at a disadvantage, to record that information so you can go back and utilize it because different environments and different soils and different situations, like thinking about weather and things that are going on, you're gonna notice different things. And the last kind of thing to think about is don't be afraid to change your rotation plans. When we're in the garden, we have to pay attention to what's going on and be flexible. And if something isn't working, then it's okay to adjust your plan. Don't think that you've planned out a 5-year rotation and you cannot deviate from that. If something's not working for your garden, then you use the information that you've collected and help you make decisions how to best utilize the space in your garden. And it's okay to experiment and it's okay to change things to find the best solution for your specific conditions. So hopefully that gives you a bit of information about crop rotation and thinking about maybe some different aspects of it than just the families, and you will be able to utilize that as you plan your gardens for the next season. So if there are questions, we can go ahead and start doing that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. Do you want to just go through those last couple slides so
Yep,
folks can do the
yep.
um, great. So before we jump into questions, if folks could scan this QR code, you could do it with your mobile phone, or I will put the link into the chat box to fill out our evaluation, and then we'll hop into those questions.